Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. Welcome to When Privacy Compliance Gets Stuck, Do's and Don'ts of Privacy Operations. Today, I'll be talking about privacy operations, a topic near and dear to many of our hearts, especially since GDPR went into force in May 2018. And here in the U.S., we now have a California law, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which kicked off a GDPR-like set of requirements on January 1st. Not to mention the various other global privacy laws that have real consequences for noncompliance. My name is Adrienne Allen, and I head Security Governance, Risk, and Compliance, as well as Privacy at Coinbase, a digital currency exchange based in San Francisco, California. Today, I'm going to go through 4 simple areas that tend to be problematic and talk through some questions to ask yourselves as you build or maybe revitalize your operations and your relationships too. This definitely is not exhaustive, but can be a good place to start, or maybe just conduct a lightweight assessment on what you've done to date. So let's back up and talk about why operations matter so much right now. While regulated industries, think financial services and healthcare, have been working to comply with privacy regulations for a while now, a lot of businesses are in a new era, and for them, this is the era of compliance with teeth. For many companies that haven't needed to allocate resources towards privacy in the past, the potential for pretty large fines under GDPR or now even the CCPA is enough to increase budgets and apply new resources towards compliance. And obviously, compliance needs ops to get done. So before we get into some of the common pitfalls, I want to take a quick look at privacy ops first. And the IAPP recently put out a great report on operations that's worth taking a look at. I'll highlight a few of their takeaways here. Common things that organizations of all sizes work on are data inventories and data maps. Notably, most organizations are using internal tools to do this, not commercial software. And internal tools does include spreadsheets. Companies are buying software to help with specific needs, not necessarily for a silver bullet that helps with all of their privacy ops. There may be a single tool that helps with CSARs, a single tool that helps with mapping, but not one tool to rule them all. DPIAs, or data protection impact assessments, are currently the most common form of privacy risk assessment conducted, then followed by vendor risk assessments. So less common across the organizations that responded is the volume of DPIAs. Only 38% report having completed between 1 and 5 since May of 2018, and 17% report having completed none. Most commonly is because you don't conduct high-impact risk processing activities. And for data subject access requests, 47% of companies have been receiving about 1 to 10 per month, 16% receive somewhere between 11 and 99 per month, and only 3% receive more than 500 per month since 2018. Across the board, regardless of how many companies are getting, the process has been entirely manual but somewhat mature, or manual and ad hoc. So either way, companies are spending a lot of human capital on fulfilling these requests. And then lastly, about 70% of organizations have not filed a data breach report. So the main takeaway here is that despite business size, many organizations are using kind of a smattering of internal tools or specialized commercial tools to solve their privacy issues. So it's a pretty easy conclusion that we need people to manage this set of tools and processes. And that's primarily where privacy ops comes in. Lastly, since May 2018, IAPP concluded that privacy programs overall are a lot more mature. They're completing tasks, we understand data better, we've invested in more tech to help them with their work. So, in the past 2 years, privacy operations, privacy programs have seen a lot of positive change. And why operations? So the point of operations is to develop repeatable processes that can self-manage, as well as to groom the teams, the people implementing the processes to optimize over time. This graphic, some of you may be familiar with who are joining us from the government, shows the Capability Maturity Model, or CMM. This was originally developed by the Software Engineering Institute and ultimately taken over by Carnegie Mellon University. And traditionally, it's been helpful for software development, but it's also been heavily used by programs of all caliber in need of a way to measure basic maturity. So a lot of what I'm discussing today shows up in the difference between level 2 managed and level 3 defined. And the main difference is bumping privacy process up from being project-based to organization-based. At level 3 or defined, privacy ideally is integrated into an organization's vision and specifically its standards, so that it starts to naturally influence projects, as opposed to level 2 where privacy process might be a part, but it's designed in at the project level. It's not necessarily an organizational value or a set of expected standards. And then obviously you want to be able to get up to a place to where you're in level 4 or 5, not all the time, but for the majority, where you can quantitatively measure how those processes are operating and work on continually making them better. So for context, the stakeholders that are involved generally cover 4 buckets. First is the leadership team that sets the risk appetite and, importantly, the budget for privacy operations. The privacy team or department is actually running the program, the privacy program, and telling the organization what it needs to do with respect to privacy. It also reports on privacy risks to the leadership. There should be a pretty direct line of communication between leadership and the privacy team. And it also develops asks of the extended teams that conduct the operations on behalf of privacy. Generally, we assume that privacy is a smaller team, finite resources. It is dependent on other teams to actually, enforce the processes that will adequately protect privacy. Privacy champions, or the extended privacy team, are kind of the implementers of the program. They're the ones that don't report into privacy, but do the lion's share of the operations. This can include teams like customer support, responding to DSAR requests, talking with customers, data managing how data flows throughout the organization, keeping track of what access and deletion requests do to the data sets, and security, obviously. And then we have internal consumers or partners. And while we say consumers here, these still are internal teams that essentially are consuming requirements from privacy. This can include teams like marketing, sales, user research, product, et cetera. They may be on the same teams as the champions, but they're more so the recipients of privacy guidance and requirements, not necessarily invested in the privacy future of the company. They're the ones actually innovating with the data, developing the company roadmap and strategy, ultimately providing feedback to privacy. And there's a really healthy kind of back and forth pressure here that can exist between privacy and consumers. We rely on the internal consumers or partners to innovate, to push the ante here, and then privacy is kind of applying that pressure to make sure that we're doing right by the data and taking good care of what we've been entrusted with. And then the second part here is what do operations look like when they're points in time versus ongoing? So in the lead up to a deadline, operations might be more point in time. It probably looks like a lot of discovery. You establish your data rights process to be able to respond to your customer requests, assuming that you're customer facing. You're conducting a data inventory or building a data map. You're authoring policies. All of those can be point in time processes, not necessarily ongoing until you turn them into ongoing activities. Ongoing operations include all of those things to the left that then kind of become part and parcel of day-to-day life at your organization. It also includes things like equipping teams to authorize access based on the policies that you write. These policies, procedures that teams action on can change frequently or at least require regular updates to make sure they stay relevant. Access is changing all the time. You might have new services that are consuming data in new ways. You might have new teams being created. All of those require taking a look at whatever data access process that you've defined in the past and making sure it's still relevant and still appropriate for whatever you're doing newly with that data. Ongoing operations should also include regular partnership with marketing to develop rules so you don't run afoul of specific marketing laws. This has definitely become more important under the CCPA, and as marketing teams within companies kind of expand and contract with the economy, with product roadmaps, et cetera, there may be more or less creative undertakings that marketing teams want to do in order to reach more people, all of which is fantastic in the best interest of the company, but it does require a pretty tight partnership to make sure that we're kind of staying within the lines that we've defined as appropriate. Operations can also include what automated jobs you want to create to manage the data that you own or that that's in your care, or figuring out how updates to your internal tooling works. So if most organizations are using, kind of this patchwork of internal tools and kind of specialized software, then you do need to go through a series of pretty robust decisions, like what teams make the updates and will they agree to that. Maybe people assume that a specific team has that mission, but if they're getting hammered with other requests, or if that's not on their roadmap, then there may be a negotiation there. How does knowledge share work? So if we have someone leave the company or a team mission change, documentation and institutional knowledge is enough to train someone new to operate that tooling, to make updates, to take a look at the code base, et cetera. How long you can live without tooling updates if there are higher priorities that are taking precedence. Maybe it's something that you decide that just isn't a priority, it's not a high risk, but you don't want to let it go as long as a year without someone looking at it. How do you make that decision, and how do you ensure that stays top of mind? So defining that process, making that decision in partnership with the team accountable is pretty important. And lastly, how you track and request those tooling updates so you know which ones are still risky. So when does all of this go wrong? There are 4 areas I'll mention today. These certainly are not exhaustive, but a few common ones at least. So we'll take each of these in turn. So the first one is continuing asks after a compliance lift. The wrong way of doing this is continuing to come back to teams that are executing on behalf of privacy and asking for one more thing. This truly is death by 1,000 cuts, and we don't do ourselves any favors on privacy teams by taking this approach. So say you've worked on a large lift with your champions and internal partners to get ready for a deadline, but asks keep proliferating, and they have to, even after that deadline passes. We find flaws or bugs in our tooling, we have patchy solutions, we have processes with gaps in them, or we have emerging risks. So there is going to be some constant work on these, and we need a plan for asking those. Some suggestions here include deciding how future changes should be addressed. And this is also dependent on communicating privacy as a new phase for the company and asking leadership to help you to do this if needed, to set expectations correctly. It's not a one-time project, but it's now a part of doing business, and we need to be able to have this conversation so we're not causing teams fatigue. We do decide how future changes are addressed in partnership with the champions and partners. This might include significant increases in asks versus small one-offs that can easily get deprioritized, like the tooling changes that I mentioned earlier. What is the written down plan for each of those types of changes, and can everyone agree to it and feel positively about it? And then we have quarterly touch points to figure out whether you've reached an inflection point in the company. Has the company risk appetite changed? Are you undertaking lots of new work with new data or new teams? And if so, has the burden increased on the privacy team to keep up with all of those activities? Is it proper to allocate a full-time employee, or maybe even someone on a part-time but periodic basis to help with this? And ultimately, how do we help other teams plan for ongoing work? So second is adding a new value. And really, at the end of the day, you're asking people at your company to care about something new. The wrong way of doing this is only communicating about privacy theoretically. We all work with finite resources, and talking about it in theory is unlikely to get whatever budget we ask for. So the right way of doing this is, first of all, that acknowledging that people have different opinions. When we're talking about our personal opinion about privacy and what other companies do with our own data versus how we think about privacy on behalf of our team when we're trying to maximize revenue for our company. Revenue is almost always going to be a stronger motivator, so we have to tangibly connect privacy to the company's strategy. If you can identify and quantify the trade-offs to help leadership understand what privacy risks to weigh against the business risks, that will give them better data to make the right call with. And there are certainly going to be times where business risks trump privacy risks, but we need to be able to have that rationale and that documentation. And if you can help them anticipate those risks, even better. There is a book commonly used to help quantify risk. It's called How to Measure Anything, and there's it's been turned into a few different versions. There's one specifically about how to measure cybersecurity risk, all of which are flawed but are still very helpful. And some of these can help you calibrate privacy risk for these types of conversations with leadership. Third is changing product development norms. And the wrong way of doing this is taking a one-sided approach where privacy comes up with the needs in isolation and then presents it on a golden platter to the product organization. It should be consultative. So the right way of doing this is building a lot of relationships over time. This is really, really critical to creating a new program inside any company to understand what's important to product or the business, whatever the generating part, the revenue generating part of the business is going to be. What are their norms? You probably don't know all of them. How does the product org or the org in question see itself? Are there some teams that are tasked with implementing cultural changes, and how do those cultural changes happen? What kind of impact will this have? What benefits are we bringing to the organization from increased privacy or increased attention on certain data sets that might be higher risk in terms of privacy? What is going to be the cost of additional privacy reviews? Are we slowing things down? By how much? What will they not be able to pursue, or what are we cautioning them against pursuing as a result of the newly formed privacy risk appetite? And again, all of this can be iterated on over time to make sure that it stays relevant. So an example here for working with, changing product norms is around privacy reviews. So take privacy by design. Product privacy reviews are one area of operations. And we may already have a process in place for security to review new features to products or services. So it may be, the right place to start to add in a few additional questions to an existing review process, if that's what you decide is right for your company. So if that's our hypothetical scenario and we're trying to design for efficiency, we do eventually want to equip teams as much as possible to operate without a bottleneck. So let's focus on the medium and high risks, and the goal is to expedite reviews for everyone involved. For a given review, we have considerations like type of data, volume of the data, what's being done with it, et cetera. All of these questions that we generally tend to answer in our privacy impact assessments anyway. So the privacy team can create a simple spectrum here, and this is very illustrative. It's not real, but kind of a starting point, where low-risk activities are maybe those that only touch aggregated data in low volumes, and those generally don't require more than a cursory review. And those on the right, maybe large amounts of sensitive data requiring deeper privacy review, or even multiple low-risk activities that are taken together. May give the privacy team a sense of how long a given review might take and which ones they can expedite. One other thing privacy can ask teams for is to share what other projects or past requests this current request is similar to. If privacy or security has already approved something that looks similar to a new submission and the risk has already been assessed and approved, then it's likely a quick approval. So if privacy can come up with this rubric for expediting the low-risk reviews, that helps to ensure that the privacy team at least is spending time on the higher-risk submissions and giving the partner teams submitting for review the power to run fast. We partner with them to understand what triggers a deeper review, ideally, through this process, and you help them understand why. Ultimately, you do want to help train them on why certain activities are risky and which ones aren't. And that's the way you start eventually building, privacy DNA into the product teams or the revenue generating teams. And lastly is adding process. So the wrong way to do this is to add process in isolation without research into what other asks are likely to be made, or if there are asks that are already being made. Certainly communication is key here. If you're not communicating to all of the stakeholder groups or widely enough what the meaningful impact is of adding privacy process, that's kind of a no-brainer, but really the win here is to be able to consolidate privacy steps or privacy asks with other compliance efforts as much as possible. So if you know that an audit is upcoming or ongoing, are there any common controls between that audit or a security review and what you're conducting for privacy? Can you identify maybe some efficiencies there and leverage another process that's already ongoing, so you don't end up going to the same teams to ask them the same questions for the same information. Across all of these, we want to be able to solicit feedback. How is privacy acting as a partner? Are we earning trust? Are we respecting efficiency? Are we showing interest in learning what's important to the business? And then you also want to send update on the impact that privacy is having. If we're avoiding risky situations, then communicate that back out to the teams that you're partnering with. That's exciting for everyone to hear. And it's worth highlighting a parity here of the CMM, affectionately known as the capability immaturity model. Here we have an example of level 1, or level -1, rather, the obstructive level, where adherence to process itself is a measure of success, and any actual creation of viable product is incidental. That's not what we want to go for. The assumption here is that if the proper process is followed, then high quality is guaranteed. And, you know, in sum, this is the non-goal of privacy operations. We don't want to idolize process because we think it's going to protect privacy. It probably won't, and it'll crush your other teams at the same time. So I'll mention again the importance of constant assessment to make sure that you're matching the process to make sure that it's appropriate to the business, and kind of doing that quarterly touch point to make sure that the appetite is known to everyone. So in sum, privacy requirements aren't going away anytime soon. We want to avoid making process itself the goal, but you are creating change, and operations have to happen and have to get better. We do have to go up and to the right along that maturity curve. So we partner as much as possible and identify whether cultural change needs to happen. And if it does, then you work with the teams that you partner with to design for efficiency and keep it risk-based, and definitely ask for help when you need to. So we'll keep it short and sweet. That's it. And I'm happy to take some questions if there are any from those online. All right, looks like we don't have any at the moment. So thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.